From the instant of that first blast until Hiroshima vanished from the list of living cities, closely guarded plants in New Mexico, Tennessee, and the state of Washington continued their work. Beside our military traffic trudged the survivors of vanished Hiroshima, the first city in history to be atom-bombed into oblivion.
The nuclear industry has encountered widespread and passionate opposition since it announced itself to the world at Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. Since that time, many Australians have worked to limit our involvement in the nuclear industry.
We have a moral obligation and a practical obligation to supply. Let me just take the question of the practical obligation a bit further.
I understand the views of people about uranium. We're not hypocritical about uranium. The Labor Party is. You either allow uranium from any source in Australia or you don't allow any.
Successive governments have proposed numerous uranium mines, nuclear power plants and radioactive waste dumps. Some proposals have been successful, but most have not.
You're not going to capture me in my own office. No.
Our current government has once again put the nuclear fuel chain back on the agenda, with proposals for increased mining, nuclear power stations and a radioactive waste dump.
It is with pride that I now open Calder Hall, Britain's first atomic power station.
This video will look briefly at each stage of the nuclear fuel chain and a few of the problems associated with each stage. We believe nuclear to be unclean, unsafe and unnecessary. The nuclear fuel chain begins with mining, the process of refining uranium ore into uranium oxide or yellowcake. Australia has about 40% of the world's uranium, but exports only about 20% of world supply. There are 3 mines currently operating in Australia, one of which is Ranger, which lies within World Heritage listed Kakadu National Park.
This area has been World Heritage listed for 2 values, for natural and for cultural values, in recognition of that very close relationship between the land and the people.
The Mirror, on whose land Ranger sits, have always been opposed to uranium mining. They were forced by an Act of Parliament into accepting Ranger.
You're not allowed to stay here.
They have continued to oppose the development of the Jabluka mineral lease, a second uranium deposit on their land, since it was discovered.
You going to stay here or leave?
We're all going to stay.
You're under arrest?
In 1989, thousands of people travelled to Kakadu to join the Mirror in their fight. Construction of the mine began in that same year, but the mine owner, now Rio Tinto, was forced to cease construction and rehabilitate the site. The campaign was a major victory, though the mineral lease has yet to be incorporated into Kakadu National Park. In addition to Ranger, there are 2 other mines operating in Australia, both in South Australia. Beverley uses the world's worst practice of in situ acid leaching, which is contaminating underground aquifers. The Olympic Dam mine at Roxby Downs is Australia's largest, currently owned by BHP Billiton.
The ore body here was discovered by WMC in 1975. Production began in 1988.
Is that air contaminated at all?
The current capacity of the operation is about 200,000 tonnes a year of copper, 4,500 tonnes of uranium and some gold and silver as well.
There's been 2 fires of the solvent extraction plant.
The Olympic Dam mine is licensed to use 42 million litres of water a day from the Great Artesian Basin. The loss of this ancient groundwater is damaging the mound springs of the Arabana people.
In the creation time, the warriors and that used to go out hunting, and while they're out there hunting, they'd be checking out what's what. Then we had this old snake used to live here, because this is what it built. This was his arm. This used to flow right back here as well. That's why they call it the bubbler. It used to bubble right up. And again, because of the water that they're taking, it's just knocking around a bit.
So what you're looking at now used to be a wetlands, and so now we've just got 2 flowing parts here and the bit we looked at over there. It doesn't form a creek anymore.
And this spring we're at now, you reckon the pressure has dropped here to something enormous. So the whole pressure's dropping in the whole area.
BHP Billiton is currently undertaking a study into the possibility of further expanding the operation. That study will continue until about early 2009.
If this expansion goes ahead, it will make Olympic Dam the biggest uranium mine in the world. It will also move from being an underground mine into being a vast open cut.
The production capacity would go up to about 500,000 tonnes of copper and about 15,000 tonnes of uranium.
An expansion of the mine would mean an expansion of its use of water. As well as continuing to use water from the Great Artesian Basin, the company now hopes to build a desalination plant on Spencer Gulf. Such a facility would have unknown environmental impacts and might threaten the breeding grounds of whales. Expansion of the mine would also greatly increase its demand for energy. After the uranium has been extracted, the wastes end up in a tailings dam.
Have you had any problems with the tailings? Have you had any leakage, seepage?
There was a seepage incident.
It was about 3 gigalitres.
Could you put it in litres rather than in...
That's 3,000 million litres.
3,000 million litres.
There was a parliamentary inquiry into that, and it was identified that there was seepage into the groundwater underneath the tailings dam. There's continued seepage from the tailings dams into the groundwater, but the aquifer is very non-transmissive.
What's the half-life of the radioactivity in the tailings?
I don't know. Yes, it would be a long time.
The half-life of the uranium ore in the Roxby tailings dam is 4.5 billion years, which means that this tailings dam will still be radioactive when our planet ceases to exist.
But, I mean, who can control cars, who can control plane crashes, who can control all other things that contribute to death?
Once mined, yellowcake goes through a second refining process. Uranium is a radioactive heavy metal that has been found to be very effective at penetrating armour. Uranium enrichment provides a small amount of uranium-235, which can be used in a reactor, and large amounts of uranium-238, which cannot.
Projectile consists of a metal long rod penetrator with a sabot surrounding it. The sabot falls away from the penetrator as it flies toward the target. It often causes secondary explosions if it hits onboard ammunition or fuel.
When a missile with the uranium-238 penetrator hits its target, some of the uranium is vaporized and can readily assimilate into the local environment.
Meanwhile, other Iraqi cities were also subjected to U.S. bombings.
People, especially children, who live in areas where DU has been used, are showing signs of radiation-related illnesses, as are returned soldiers and their families.
This is a normal boy in she was pregnant, yeah, and take a radiation. And this is premature.
Oh, yeah, premature.
Radioactivity comes from the decay of unstable atoms like uranium. If left alone, uranium will, over billions of years, shed its unstable atoms and become lead. The nuclear fuel chain interrupts this process and creates a number of unnatural and highly toxic particles. These particles affect living things by causing damage to cells. In high doses, they can kill cells outright. In lower doses, they can cause mutations. These mutations can result in cancers and birth defects.
The power of the reactor suddenly increased. There was a considerable discharge of steam, and the subsequent reaction led to the formation of hydrogen, its explosion, and the destruction of the reactor, and the accompanying radioactive discharge.
Here, at 1:26 a.m. on the 26th of April 1986, Valery Ilyich died, the first victim of the Chernobyl disaster. The town of Pripyat, previously 30,000 inhabitants, now none. The evacuation took an entire week. This town will not be found on future maps. 30,000 people used to live here. All those who didn't work in the nuclear power station were evacuated. Chernobyl will disappear from the map.
20 years on, Estimates of the death toll from Chernobyl vary greatly. The International Atomic Energy Agency predicts that the total death toll will eventually be about 9,000. Other more independent studies estimate that 20 to 30,000 people will eventually die, while other studies suggest a still higher toll. Apart from the death toll, Chernobyl has had many other major impacts, including the forced relocation of about 250,000 people. Reactor safety has been improved since Chernobyl, but the risk of catastrophic accidents can only be reduced. It cannot be eliminated.
I think this country should examine the nuclear option. It is too early to be talking about individual locations because... Well, Mr Speaker, I think this nation, if it is serious about climate change, has to look at the nuclear option. I'm not frightened of that. I'm not ruling out power stations anywhere in this country.
We use at the moment about 120 megawatts. It's about 10% of the base load of South Australia. The question was how much, what are our greenhouse gas emissions per year? At the moment, my understanding is that they're about 1 million tonnes.
Yes, the situation is under control, and yes, we know what we're doing.
There was an uncontrolled release of radiation from the facility.
Small amounts of radioactive iodine have turned up in milk sold in New York City stores.
As well as providing electricity, all nuclear reactors produce plutonium. Plutonium is used to make nuclear weapons. Even relatively small research reactors, like the one at Lucas Heights in the suburbs of Sydney, can produce enough plutonium to make nuclear weapons. Nuclear power reactors have produced, so far, enough to build about 160,000 nuclear weapons. 10 countries have to date produced the bomb. 5 of them, North Korea, Israel, India, Pakistan and South Africa, did so by misusing their supposedly peaceful nuclear facilities. The other 5, the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France and China, all maintain pervasive links between the civil and military arms of their nuclear industries. Some of the fuel left behind by power reactors is reprocessed.
In places like Sellafield in the United Kingdom, the unspent part of the fuel is removed so it can be made into fuel rods again. A volume of waste is produced which is up to 190 times greater than what was started with. These wastes, which once again include plutonium, are routinely and accidentally released into the local environment. Plutonium from Sellafield can now be found in the beaches of the Cumbrian coast, in the Arctic ice cap, and in the fish of the Irish Sea.
This coastline is one of the most radioactive environments in the world. Radioactive effluent is discharged down this pipeline into the Irish Sea. Around the pipeline, it's highly radioactive.
Well, I'm getting a reading of 40 counts per second here, which is really quite considerable.
Today, people still fish the seas around Sellafield. However, due to their radioactivity, the fish cannot be eaten. British Nuclear Fuels, or BNFL, the operator of Sellafield, buy the fish and then dispose of them as radioactive waste. Since the time of the Celts, a few thousand years ago, the British Isles have seen 5 or so major civilisations come and go. It's uncertain if BNFL are planning to compensate the next 300 civilisations, which will have to live with their contamination. The waste will be around for about 250,000 years.
On a highway in Normandy, a truck carrying radioactive waste is heading for the Champagne region. The truck has left La Hague Nuclear Reprocessing Plant in Normandy for CSA, the Nuclear Waste Centre La Hougue in Solane, Champagne. This facility stores low-level radioactive waste and buries it in these concrete blocks. Before its construction, the French Nuclear Waste Authority, ANDRA, said there would be no radioactive releases into the environment. But radioactive tritium has been found in underground water, and it also has been discharged into the atmosphere. The region is famous for its vineyards, which produce premier champagne wines. Michel Moret lives in the region. He says the residents are worried that the presence of the nuclear waste facility could affect the local wine industry.
Et puis nous avons aussi une grosse crainte pour l'image du vin de Champagne, puisque nous sommes en pleine région Champagne-Ardenne, et les premières vignes d'appellation Champagne sont à quelques kilomètres du centre de Soulaine. Donc au niveau de l'image, il y a vraiment un gros risque économique.
There is not one permanent high-level nuclear waste repository anywhere in the world. The Yucca Mountain project in the United States is the most advanced. It has so far cost $10 billion and is 20 years behind schedule.
And I'm concerned for my grandchildren. My children live here. The depreciation of our property, our water quality, our quality of life.
I guess I would be most concerned probably with transportation issues.
Let's see the pay window. He wants the money. Let's go. Durka. Look at this for a match.
I don't know why they're putting it in Australia for. But it's no good for the animals and all that sort of things. Gonna rule all the kangaroos and that. Whatever people gotta kill, eat. And people get a kangaroo that might get stuff with it and that's it.
A lot of people coming down talking about that one from Putman. And we said, no, we don't want it. We want to keep that place clean. So we got a lot of pushback and all that, and we got sacred sites and all that.
When was the first time that you knew that this was one of the sites that they were looking at for radioactive waste?
When it was in the papers, there was no consultation with us at all. My fear is it's going to contaminate those two rivers in there. The government is destroying our country. What are we going to have left after they're bringing all this damn nuclear business in?
Are there any other impacts that this
well,
will have that you're concerned
spiritual. And I've always believed this, that they break that connection, you've broken the spirit of the black man. And I hope that they don't think that they're going to do that.
Magadi in a good country, a lot of bush prayer, everything. You know, a lot of bush talk.
We mean no, and the government's going to have to start respecting, Indigenous people. Start hearing our voices. We might be one or two voices in this wind now. It gets blown away. But tell you what, our voices can be strong if we come together and support one another. Our voices will get very loud and strong.
All the station owners have to talk up also for their cattle and that. That's what I reckon. And not only that, it goes down from here down on the Plenty River. That's where they're going to start. That's going to go down the bottom end, even on the Sandover, all that river. If all that nuclear waste runs in, it's how it breaks away from the thing.
We're worried about that pit, that when, if we don't stop these waste dumping mob, if they go ahead and develop the waste dump where they propose to do it now, it'll damage this very river here. Got to be the oldest river in the world, because up here you'll see about 350 million years old. Yeah. Oh, it's got it there. Look, I'm not telling a lie. There it goes into the lake here, which is it's only 65 million years old. That's the only reason I'm on Earth. We've been put on Earth so we can be kicked around like a football. That's a joke, that one. But no, it is. They're trying to kill it from both ends.
We don't want no waste dump. We don't want no mines. We don't want no waste dump. This is a big crime.
In September 2004, the Minister for the Environment gave an absolute categorical assurance that there would be no dump in the Northern Territory. He broke that promise. The government has continued to break promises and try and take away Territorians' rights to act, to speak. At the moment, it is a time of choice in Australia. We can choose to be a clean, clever country. We can choose to be responsible and democratic. We can choose to be respectful for the planet, for human rights, for the future. Or we can sit back and become the world's largest radioactive quarry and nuclear dump.
But we haven't started on them yet. We haven't finished. We'll give them a run for their money. So don't give up yet. Don't give up hope that we can't stop these mobs, because that's what we're going to do. And so I'm starting to enjoy it now, because I think the best is yet to come. So we've got good actions coming up, and then when we win it, I'll put on a party for you. We will have a party in the desert. We'll have one down the lake, and we'll have one up here. We'll have it all the way down. Good on you, mate.